Well, good morning and welcome to Whiteboard Wednesday. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to talk today about what I think is one of the saddest things. You know, we often are concerned about our kids or our grandkids, and you as listeners, I'm sure, are as well. You're concerned about the world in which they're living. You're concerned about the world in which they are being raised. And we are right in those concerns because we have a perspective from where we sit different than our kids or our grandkids' perspective. We can see things a little differently. We've been down the road a little further, and we can possibly see pitfalls. We can see potholes. We can see obstacles. And we try to share with them some of these truths that we found, the experiences that we had. But somewhere along the way, I feel that there has become less conversation concerning some of the important things. And the thing is, we find this in Scripture. That we are not new to this. Sometimes we feel like we're the first generation to deal with something, and we're not. This is something that's happened before. When you go and you look at the book of Judges, and this was in our reading the other day, that whole generation was also gathered to their ancestors, and after them, another generation rose up who did not know the Lord or the works he had done for Israel. Now, I find this to be quite sad, simply because here you have Moses having passed it off to Joshua. Joshua led them across the Jordan River, all of the battles that the Lord provided for them. He gave them houses they didn't build, vineyards they didn't plant, fruit they didn't nurture. And oh my goodness, what a great prosperity they received, and abundance they received. And the Bible says that they followed the Lord as through the life of Joshua and through the life of the elders of that time. And then you get this verse. That whole generation, the generation that led and followed, they were gathered, they died. And after them, another generation rose up who didn't know the Lord or the works he had done. Now, is it the next generation? Is it a couple of generations? How long is it? Well, it's a little bit vague as to how long it might have been. But that's not the point, is it? The point is the belief, the conviction, maybe even the tradition had not been handed down to the next generation. And that's sad to me. And it's one thing if it had said that they didn't know the Lord, and living in the place where they were living, not a lot different than where we are, actually, when you talk about the cultural influences, the outside religious influences. If a generation had grown up and didn't know the Lord, you could simply look at those words and say they didn't choose to have a relationship with the Lord. But the author of Judges adds another phrase that I believe makes this complicated. They didn't know the works either. In other words, nobody had been talking about the goodness of God. They hadn't been talking about the generosity of God, the grace of God, the protection of God, the opportunities from God, how he parted the waters, how he kept them alive, how he fed them in miraculous ways, how their clothes didn't wear out in 40 years, how they shouted and the walls came down, and all of these things. How do they not know? How could they have not heard? And so, what I title this generation that he's talking about, Generation Lost. And how in the world could that have happened? How could that have actually happened? What happened that caused a generation to rise up that did not know the Lord or the works of the Lord? Well, there's 5 things that I want us to talk about today on Whiteboard Wednesday. And then I'm going to give us a few, 5 reasons why I think it happened then and why it can happen now. And then 5 solutions for us in having a generation gained back. As far as Christianity goes, church goes, as far as we who are living today. So what happened? Well, first of all, I think we look at there was a lack of conversation. If they didn't know the Lord because they chose not to know the Lord, not to relate to the Lord, that's a personal choice. But if they did not know the works of the Lord, then there's a lack of conversation. They're just not having those conversations. In fact, it may be that we, the people, if we're going to bring this up to date, are we having the conversations? In other words, are we talking about the goodness of God? Are we talking about the grace of God? Are we talking about the miracles of God? Are we talking about the patience of God in our own life, or the movement of God in our own hearts today? You see, I hear a lot of conversation that goes on among Christians, and most of it's angry and hateful. We need to season our conversations, and we need to pepper them with a balance, at least, of talking about how God is working in my heart today. Look at what God did for me today. Imagine if we would do that more often, then we would not face a generation that would rise up and at minimum wouldn't know the works of God. At least they would know because they've heard from us. We get instructive when it comes to our kids. We get very instructive when it comes to our grandkids, right? Of course we do. We want them to do better than we did, have better than we did, be better than we were, right? Sure, I get that. But in the instruction, let us not forget to include how God is actively working in our life. Now, that means that the prerequisite is that we are recognizing how God is moving and stirring in our hearts, how God reveals himself. How did he reveal himself to you today in his reading? You know, there are times that I'll read the 2 or 3 chapters in our reading plan, and maybe I'm in a funk that day. Maybe I'm having a difficult day. Maybe I don't know. But I'll read the 2 chapters, and at the very beginning, I didn't get anything to write down about that 2 chapters, right? I know many of us face that. And I have to discipline myself to go back, read it again. Because I firmly believe God has a word for us every day. He does not sleep. He does not slumber. His mercies are new every day. So therefore, there's something for me every day in every reading. And I have to focus my mind and focus my heart and say, God, I need you today. See, I think the largest problem that we have is that we don't need God today. That now we do. Don't hear what don't hear what I'm not saying. We need God every day, but oftentimes we go about it going, it's okay. If I didn't get anything out of the reading day, no big deal. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe next year. But here's the deal. God has something for you today. We have to discipline ourselves to hear it. And then in this context of conversation, we have to have conversations with our loved ones, our coworkers. We have to be the one who talks about the goodness of God. How are they going to hear about the goodness of God if we're not peppering and seasoning our conversations with this? So we need to have conversations more than condemnations. Now, hey, a whole bunch of us are mad at things in the White House, things in the courthouse, things in the community, things that, we're frustrated. It's not like it used to be. I don't like where we are now and in our timeline of history. I don't like it. I get it. But the goodness of God will overcome. And we have got to be having those conversations of the goodness of God, the greatness of God, how the grace of God, all of these things, because he has been and he is all of that to us every day. So we need to have these conversations every day. Secondly, a lack of life on life discipleship. How in the world could a generation rise up and not know except that we lack life on life discipleship? Let me tell you something. Dragging our kids and dragging our grandkids just to the worship service in hopes that in a group environment, they're going to somehow hear, and in the form of discipleship, there might be phrases, there might be moments, there might be pieces, but here's the deal. Life on life discipleship is where it's at. Jesus called out 12. He talked to 120. He talked to 500. He talked to 5,000 men plus all the women and children. He would speak to them all. But he pulled the 12 away and spent life on life time with them. Then he pulled 3 out of that, and he spent deeper time in that. There is a time for community discipleship. That's awesome. Then there's a time for a smaller group discipleship, but there's even biblical precedent in the life of Jesus for even a closer, deeper moment. 3 guys in him, he would pull those Peter, James, and John. He'd pull them out and have intimate moments with them of discipleship. If we want to stem the tide, if we want to turn this country around, if we want to turn our own family around, we've got to get back to life on life discipleship. Not just hoping that they get it somewhere along the way, but that we are taking the initiative of sitting down and having general conversations, having God conversations, having Bible conversations, having these deeper conversations in what I would call life on life discipleship. And I think it's very important. Assumptions. Sometimes we have the best intentions and it rides on the vehicle of assumption. And the problem is that vehicle breaks down. We can assume that they're getting it. Well, I don't know why my son acts the way he does. I don't know why. I don't know why he won't take his kids to church. I raised my son in church. Here's the deal. We can drag them to church. We can have them at church in like when I was growing up, 3 days a week, 3 times a week, we were in church. And you can assume that they're going to get it. But you've got to have, and it goes back to the conversations, it goes back to the discipleship. Well, how could they not know? Well, you'd be amazed at how they could not know. This generation was lost because they didn't know. Was it a sense of assumption? Was it that they assumed, hey, they're growing up in our home. They know we love God. It's like in marriage, and the wife is feeling unsupported and unloved and uncared for, and in counseling, it comes up that she just wants to hear him say, "I love you." And he then replies and goes, how do you not know I love you? I go to work every day. I put money in the bank. I put food on the table. I don't have to say that. I don't have to say I love you. How many moms have told their kids, hey, your daddy loves you. He doesn't have to say it. Yeah, he does. Yeah, we can't assume that. It needs to be spoken. And even if it wasn't spoken in your generation, it has to be spoken in this one. Even if it wasn't spoken in your growing up times, it has to be done in this time. We cannot assume that it's going to transfer unless we take intentional steps of transfer, unless we take intentional moments and make sure that it happens. We can't just assume it's going to happen. Is that a possibility as to how Judges 2:10 came about? How did this generation rise up and not know? How do we have a generation of teenagers and children who, according to Barna research, are only going to be 4% Christian? How does that happen? Aren't we a Christian nation? Well, that's maybe another topic for another time, because I would say we're not. But here's the thing. We assume some things that we cannot assume anymore. And before we get on the bandwagon of, oh, well, Roe versus Wade and 1968, taking the Bible out of school, and we don't have that. No, this is a home problem. We have assumed that it's going to pass on, and it doesn't. We have to be intentional about it. Abdication. And sometimes we passively assume it's going to happen. But then sometimes we just abdicate the responsibility. I'll never forget the story about one of the times my dad was pastoring a church, and a mom brought their child by to see him, and she said, his name's Bill. Hey, brother Bill, I can't do anything with him, so I need you to fix him. And he looked at her very honestly and very kindly, and he said, I have him 3 hours a week at best. You have him the other 165. This is really your job, not mine. And you know what? That is so true. Deuteronomy 6 says that the parents are supposed to be doing this with the kids. Deuteronomy 6 establishes the mom and the dad, or the surrogate mom and dad, if it's grandma, and I don't care. It is the parents, it is the family responsibility to raise up a generation to know God and to know the works of God. Now, we can't make them choose Jesus, but we can certainly make them aware in as positive a way, in as attractive a way as possible. Don't beat them over the head with the Bible. Open it up and read it with them and to them and talk about it and have the conversations. Don't abdicate to the church. That happens. It happens every day. And it's sad because the second generation has now grown up further away than the one before them. And that's the 2 generations younger than me. And it's sad because 15% of the millennials and 4% of Gen Zers, what's it going to be like in the next generation? Unless we stop assuming and abdicating our own responsibilities, this is what's going to happen. And we've got to make the change. Finally, the church. The church has, over the last 5 decades, my whole life, and probably a little before, has put programs over people. Well, we're just going to set up a new program. You get to the program and you're going to be fine. Hey, you get your youth to that youth program, they're going to be fine. You get your kid in that childhood program, you're going to be fine. And so, we have a whole, hey, let's set up a new program. And instead of looking at the people and loving people, we love our programs. And that's a hard word for some of us in our church life. That's a hard one for us today, because we think programs are what save people, and it's not. It's Jesus who saves people. And sometimes we want to defer to the program, and we need to be focusing on the person. And that's a hard. These are 5 ways I think that generation is lost. I think these are 5 ways that generations lost in our own country, and what's going to happen with the next one. Well, how can we make a difference? How can we have a generation gained? If we had a generation lost, how do we have a generation gained? Well, here's 5 things that I think that we need to incorporate into our daily life that can create a turn of the tide, if you will. First of all, authenticity. Authenticity. We're afraid of showing who we really are. We're afraid at times of not being Superman. Let me tell you something, dads. Here's a word for dads. Your kids already know you're not Superman. Okay, they already know you're not a superhero. They already know that the godlike figure they thought you were, that's gone. You're not that anymore. So own it. Understand. Look, hey, I struggle in this. I tell my kids sometimes, hey, I struggle. What you're struggling with, I did when you were a kid. And there are times maybe I even struggle with it now. It's okay. We've got to be authentic. We cannot put the masks of holiness on when our lives don't match up to it. We can't just continue to say how much better we are. We're not. I am better off because of my eternal opportunity, but I am not better than. Hear that. I'm not better than, I'm just better off. And there's a big difference in those two words. We need to be authentic. We need to just be real. We need to be who we are. Now, that begs the question, doesn't it? Am I like Jesus at all? If I take away the masks, if I take away the shroud of holiness that I put up, is who I am even worthy of following? Is who I am more like Jesus than it's not? Am I striving toward that? Be real about your struggles. This generation wants a real relationship. They want to understand that what they're going through is normal. But see, sometimes we don't allow space for that, do we? We don't. Sometimes we put on a facade, a fake outer exterior that is better than the reality of who we are. And somehow we've been taught over the years that that's what has to happen. You can't act that way in church. I've gotten, I've had comments sometimes about, why do your kids act that way in church? You worry about your kids. I'll worry about mine. My kids are like your kids. If they didn't hang out with the deacon's kids, we wouldn't have this problem. No, I'm just kidding, just joking. But the reality is, look, preacher's kids are like everybody else's kids. And managing my household is just like you managing your household. Lead them to Jesus. What's in their best interest? How do they understand Jesus more today than yesterday? Okay? So we've got to be authentic. We got to be real because they see through the fake. Let me tell you something. The emotional intelligence of every Gen Zer, now that's 18 and under right now, every Gen Zer in this world today has a greater emotional intelligence than we ever did. They smell it out. They sense it. They know when we're being fake, and they will aggressively reject fake. So we got to be real. Secondly, joy. Got to have joy. If living the Christian life is a drag and a drudgery, and you've got to have a sour look on your face in order to do it right, you're doing it wrong. I'm just telling you, you're doing it wrong. There are moments of difficulty, absolutely, but the joy doesn't have to walk away in the difficulty. In fact, I have found the joy deepens the more difficult the day is. Joy deepens. Joy expresses itself, but you've got to be there. You've got to allow the joy to get out and reveal itself. Now, again, look at the first word, authenticity and joy. But I don't feel joyful. No, you don't feel happy today. There's a difference. There's some days I'm not happy, but I can always have joy, and I need to choose the joy today. And then I need to let my face know it. Now, well, how can I have joy and be authentic at the same time? Because, if I'm having a bad day, no, here's the deal. That's where the conversation comes in. Hey, Susie Q, I'm telling you, I'm having a bad day today. I am settled in my joy in Jesus, and I am working through this. Would you pray with me that I would have a better day? Yeah, ask your kids to pray for you. It's okay. Because you want them to come to you in a real way and say, Dad, Mom, I'm struggling in this. Would you pray for me? If you want it back, you've got to take the first step. Joy. You have joy. Joy is found in Jesus. Take an interest in their life. Well, I don't like anything my grandson is doing. No, find something. Find a commonality. Find the least common denominator. Find whatever you can find. Find that one thing that you can make a connection in and do that. Talk about that. Investigate that. Show an interest in this group of people. Show an interest. I firmly believe that most youth and most children do not believe the church cares for them at all. They don't believe Christianity cares for them because all they ever hear is how bad, how awful, how far away, how dumb, how stupid, how irreverent, how disrespectful. This is all they ever hear. Take an interest. Show an interest. Hey, could you tell me your story? Hey, that's an interesting thing that you have on your leg. Would you tell me about that? Hey, that's interesting. Find something that's interesting. Don't downgrade it. Don't degrade it. Don't disrespect it. Show an interest. And I think we can start to have a gain back. Involvement. We have to involve ourselves in the next generation. You know, this is opposite of the abdication of the parent role to the church, where now we have to take an involved role. We have to take an involved role. In fact, I, as a parent, take the view that church isn't enough. It's not enough. That I, as a parent, have more to instill within them concerning the Christian walk. In fact, I would go so far to say, as I have a more important role in that spirituality and growth than the church does. We don't need to be abdicating to the church and say, you do it all. We as parents and grandparents are going to have to take an involved position and let the church be supportive in that, resourceful in that. But the main thing has got to be within the family. We have got to take an involved role in this. Finally, love. We got to love. Above all, love. We have to love people. July 11th, we're going to start a new sermon series, and it's going to be walking through the 7 churches of Revelation. And right off the bat, Jesus says, I want to see love in my church. I want to see love in my people. You know, it was out of love that God demonstrated and gave Jesus. It was out of love for the world that he gave Jesus. It was, Jesus would say, love your neighbor, love God. Leviticus says, love your neighbor, love God. Jesus would say, love your neighbor and even pray for them. Paul would say, the greatest of these is love. Paul would say, the fruit of the Spirit, and he starts with love. Love, love, love. And we can stem the tide. And so it would not be said of us that a whole generation grew up who did not know the Lord or the works thereof. Let's go win this world, and let's do it one person at a time. You guys have a great day. Hope to see you tomorrow. We got Dads with Coffee tomorrow, and Keith and I are getting prepared, and we'll see you tomorrow over coffee. You guys have a great Wednesday. All right.